Do not count a human dead until you've seen his body, and even then, you can make a mistake.
Hello and welcome back to Rehydrate. This season, we'll be reading and discussing Frank Herbert's Dune. This is Season 7, Episode 7, The Water of Life, covering Book 2, Ma'adib, chapters 12 to 16. The hosts have varying levels of knowledge of this book in this series. My name is Dan, and I've only read up to this point.
My name is Talia. I have read all of the Dune books a long time ago, and I'm rereading along with the podcast. Additionally, I've seen the 2000 miniseries and the 2021 movie.
My name is Priya, and I've only read up to this point, and I've also seen the 2021 film.
Unfortunately, Ami is not able to join us today, but he will be back for next episode. Yeah, so let's jump into the characters for this section. So we have Getty Prime, which is the Harkonnen homeworld. Count Fenring, an advisor to the Padishah Emperor, whom the Baron notes seldom held himself to a single meaning in a single phrase. He and his wife have a secret humming language between them. Lady Fenring, Count Fenring's Bene Geserit wife, who left a coded note for Jessica to find when she had first arrived in Arrakis. The old Duke Atreides, the late Duke Leto's father, killed by a bull. Thufir Hawat, the Duke's old mentat, kept in the employ of the Baron with a poison and antidote security system keeping him prisoner. Feyd-Rautha, the Na Baron, title given to the Baron's heir apparent. Chani, a Fremen girl whom Paul has visions about, and in this section she shares with Paul a vision of her own that she will have Paul's child. Hera, Jameis's wife, who is now in the service of Paul, and the Reverend Mother Ramallo, the Fremen Reverend Mother. And Talia will give us the summary of the section.
In this section, Jameis's water is transferred to Paul. The tribe and Jessica observe the all-encompassing power of water in two ways. When Paul sheds a tear at Jameis's funeral, the Sietch calls it a gift and murmur that Paul has performed a sacred act, giving water to the dead. Secondly, when Jameis's water, symbolically represented by metal water-counting rings that each member carries, is given to Paul, he asks Chani to carry them for him. Secondly, when Jameis's water, symbolically represented by metal water-counting rings that each member carries, is given to Paul, he asks Chani to carry them for him. A Fremen courtship ritual. Paul names Jessica as his enemy, as the act of even bearing him pushes him into a destiny both awesome and terrible. Back on Gaiety Prime, the Harkonnens have hatched a private plot to burnish the reputation of Feyd-Rautha during his 17th birthday. The Fenrings take note of the illusion of gaiety amidst a dilapidated lifestyle for the people outside the imperial court. The Baron floats the idea of Arrakis as a new Seleucia Secundus, a prison planet, in regards to taming but not killing the fierce Fremen. In the Gladiator Ring, the audience is expecting a drugged fight, which gives advantage to the Na Baron. Feyd-Rautha and Hawat have devised to fake the drugged state of the opponent, instead choosing to give Feyd-Rautha the upper hand by implanting a code word to hypnotically immobilize his opponent. As another feint within this, Feyd-Rautha, unknown even to Hawat, has further obfuscated the truth of the fight by switching his poisoned and non-poisoned blade. His victory sets off one of two hot-blooded, frenzied parties in this section, and he's carried away by the crowd. Undeterred by various feints, the Fenrings leave, determining that the lady will seduce the boy in order to reclaim genes for the Bene Gesserit breeding program that they believed lost with Paul Atreides. In the cavern, Jessica attempts to pass within during a Fremen ceremony to emerge as a Reverend Mother whose voice can speak multitudes. She drinks the water of life, which transports Jessica into a heightened drug state. She uses her prana bindu training to molecularly alter the water before it kills her, thus changing it for the whole Sietch. She communes with the dying Reverend Mother, absorbs her, and comforts the pre-born awareness of her unborn daughter, who unwittingly participated in the ceremony with her. Many things are revealed to Jessica. The history of the Fremen stretches back farther than is known off-planet. She briefly gains access to the place within that the Reverend Mothers fear, that only the Kwisatz Haderach may see, and learns the source of the water of life. It is the byproduct of a drowned sandworm. Using the changed water of life, the rest of the Fremen launch into an unrestrained spice orgy.
Okay. So I think maybe just jump into general impressions of the section. Maybe Priya, you want to start?
Yeah, I will admit that some parts of these chapters that we're discussing today were kind of hard for me to read. Only because like the writing is a little bit different, or it just struck me as a little different in this part. At some moments, it seems a bit slow. And also like I don't quite know what to make of the spice orgy. Like I think like on a more serious note, it's very tricky to read, to both write and to read scenes that are of a psychedelic nature, and I'm always uncertain whether I like it or not. I feel like maybe it needs to like kind of sit in my brain for a while for me to quite like appreciate it if I'm going to. So it's really hard for me to say, but this section was a little bit more challenging of a read for me. But that's not to say I didn't like it. But I mean, it was interesting, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree. I think it was the one of the more challenging sections that we've read so far. I mean, like the last chapter with the psychedelic, whatever dream state, whatever whatever the water of life section, right? I think that was pretty difficult to read and understand. I really like the kind of gladiator section. I think now like whenever I see like a Baron chapter, I'm like more interested than a Paul chapter or a Jessica chapter. I think like that the kind of the politics behind everything is the more interesting thing about this book to me. And so like yeah, like the whole section with like his changing his blades and whatever, it kind of reminded me of like the Oberyn sections from Game of Thrones, or from Storm of Swords actually. Anyway, the Game of Thrones series, you know what I mean. Anyway, Oberyn would use poison in his fight, so that it reminded me of that, and I'm sure it was inspired by that as well. But anyway, that whole section I thought was very interesting. I actually didn't catch until Talia's summary that they had some like secret language in his weird speaking voice. I guess I wasn't reading it carefully enough. Um, yeah, so I just thought he was like talking slowly on purpose, or I don't know what he was doing, but
I thought they were being annoying, like that
yeah,
character in Foundation. You know, the
yeah,
character who has a weird like
exactly.
speaking affect.
Right. And he didn't. I think we've seen this character before, and he didn't speak like that before, right? So, or did we? Or maybe he was only mentioned. I remember the Fen rings from earlier, but I don't remember if we ever like saw them directly. Maybe Talia can tell us if
Right.
you
Well, that's
remember.
sort of why I included in the definitions for these characters. Like Lady Fenring was the one who left this, the bumps on the leaf that Jessica finds in this conservatory. So we've
Yeah,
seen their importance and their evidence, and now they're like characters that we are hanging out with for the first time.
but yeah, so we never saw them before, right? Or we never like saw them in person. You know what I mean? We
Yeah, and now
never.
you
Yeah.
see some of my frustration with reading uh, Asimov's Foundation, because I'm used to when a character is speaking in an unusual way, that there's meaning behind it, that
Right.
there's, wheels within wheels that are spinning.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe you can yeah, illuminate us a little bit more about like how that was like a coded language, because I didn't get that until I read your summary.
Oh, well, they say it pretty clearly in the text that they
Do
have
they?
a humming language. She says like she hummed to him in their special language.
Hmm.
I do encourage you, Priya, like in response to you saying with psychedelic scenes, and this is, far from the first one that's been attempted in text, and it needs to sit with you if you're going to enjoy it. I would encourage you to sit with this one, whether you're Priya or a listener, because I really feel like this is where the book sort of really begins and really kicks into gear. Jessica having this awareness to alter the molecules in the water of life is something that I remembered far more than like various banquets and basic fight maneuvers and ornithopters from earlier in the book. So this actually has stayed in my memory as a book that I read a while ago and was awaiting to arrive at.
Hmm.
Yeah, I definitely appreciated the parts with Jessica and how what she's making of her experience. I think that was the better part of it for me. I think what happens kind of after once said orgy portion begins is where it starts to kind of lose me because I feel like it starts to get much more I don't know, like it's almost like the psychedelic nature of it peaks and then it kind of loses me, especially when Paul and Cheney go into this back room and it's just like I'm trying to really figure out
For sure.
what's happening between these characters, if it's real, if it's all drug induced. So that's where it kind of loses me. But like I did find the part with Jessica and how she's like, dealing with these molecules. That part was very fascinating
Well,
to
I
me.
will say that is why I dedicated like the full paragraph to talking about this ceremony. And the last two words were, by the way, spice orgy.
Right.
Yeah, I do agree with you.
FYI, side note.
Well, I'm nothing if not a faithful reduplicator of the text. I couldn't skip it, but it's far from the most interesting part of this segment. I would agree.
I do find it interesting that, like, despite the fact that we know that it's an orgy, it doesn't become like gratuitous. There is more emphasis on conversation still. Like, there is a dialogue between two characters that's intimate
Mhm.
versus just like gratuitous descriptions of an actual orgy, which I don't feel we got. Like, we know it's happening, but we
Mhm.
don't get like descriptions of that. Instead, we get a what I'm sure is meant to be a very meaningful exchange between Cheney and Paul. But what kind of like just irks me a little bit is that they're talking to each other, but under the influence of a drug. So
Mhm.
it's like,
Well,
it's
in a
like,
way,
how
they've
real is this?
like, well, sort of transcended that because Cheney's diet is so heavy in spice, and spice itself is a drug. And, Paul is becoming acclimated to that as well. So they may never have a discussion that's quote unquote sober. Um,
Ah, that's very interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. You're right.
Mm.
And speaking of that, speaking of Paul still being in the process of acclimating to just this environmental aspect of life on Arrakis, it's up until in the sections that we read prior to this, we had been focused a lot on how Paul is like the Fremen and how he knows their ways without having ever lived amongst them. And in this section, what I found interesting is that you see more emphasis on how he is other, because there are certain things that they expect him to say and do, especially during like the rituals around Jameis and his dead body and
Right,
accepting the
right. Let's
water,
talk about that.
and he doesn't automatically know what the right thing to do is per Fremen custom. So that was kind of interesting to see. Like once he's immersed in it, his intuition is not like kicking in as automatically as it had been up to that point.
But as the counter to that, he does perform these ceremonies. There's never a point in which he fails to perform. There's just this reluctance or hesitation because, we end in this very dramatic fashion. There's been a challenge to honor, there's like an outsider on planet tension happening, and it's being fought out between this Fremen Jameis and Paul, who's having like his first big boy fight, and it doesn't end with first blood as he's expecting, and he ends up killing a man for the first time. And that's where we end the section. So on this section we open and we're not really sure, like, are we going to flash forward, are we going to have this great betrayal moment, like what do we expect with our customs? And in fact the Fremen are cool as a cucumber, very accustomed to this, talking about, so his spirit will leave with the next moon. This is how his water is going to be distributed. This is like down to the decimal how it will happen. And then we're all going to participate in this ritual. So it does show this something that's a lot more common to the Fremen, but Paul does, state that he is a friend of Jameis, and that's what was required of him in that moment. Something that seems foreign to us. Yeah.
I found it's also pretty interesting that, like, he's trying to, like, present, like, to me, like, it seems like he's trying to present, like, this aura of, like, leadership, because he thinks he's gonna, he wants to become the leader and everything. But at the same time, like, when when he's directed to take the water of life, he still, like, asks his mom, like, is it okay? Like, he still has, like, some like immature qualities around him around that.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I did want to ask both of you and myself and anyone what the book suggests about the qualities and what makes a good leader. And specifically, how does Paul embody or challenge those qualities? Priya's already started by saying that he, seems to have this lore around him that he knows their ways. And then she's like, well, but we see him stumbling. So what do you see in the ways that Paul lives up to or defies those expectations of leadership?
I mean, to me, it seems like the most important thing for leadership in this group anyway is, like, kind of following tradition, right? And he's not even making it happen. He's, like, doing a good job at it, like, I think he doesn't have any prior knowledge of, like, these traditions, but he steps up and he says he's a friend of Jameis. He drinks the water of life. He's doing all the things that that he's supposed to do. And I think, like, to me, like, the Fremen respect that more than anything else in a leader. And not to mention, like, just, like, the pure strength of it's like following tradition, and then also, like, the fighting ability. He was able to best Jameis, right? And so they're going to respect that. But then if he didn't also do the tradition stuff, he probably wouldn't be followed either.
It's, because we see that in the Duke in Leto, that he stages this whole opposition to the way the Harkonnens waste water. And then in the next scene, we see him, like, taking this goblet and smashing it and, like, letting everything fall on the floor. And again, we see this tension and good leadership, because Leto is presented as a good leader, but seems to not consult anyone before that happens. And then Paul is also presented as this protagonist, and then, needs to be goaded on by Stilgar, who's like, my boy, you're delaying the ritual. And he needs, like, the thumbs up from his mom. So they're both, not they're not in the same mold, even though they're both presented as leaders so far.
I also find it interesting that certain breaks in tradition or some certain unexpected behaviors that Paul presents, while at first they give the Fremen pause and they worry that he's not really following the rituals properly. There's also this when he starts to cry instinctively over Jameis's body, they're very moved by that, because it's not immediately apparent to Paul, but the act of shedding tears for the dead is not common in their culture, but also seen as a gift and as a sign of respect that is not as readily given as you would expect in a normal at a normal funeral. So I think that kind of ingratiates more to them in an unexpected way, both to them and to him. And also, I think that going back to what we were saying before about Paul kind of stumbling through these rituals a bit this time, I totally agree with you, because with you, Talia, that you pointed out that he's just killed a man, and I'm sure that is kind of throwing his intuitions off as well, because it's the first time in his life that he's actually taken a human life. And while this custom is embedded in Fremen culture, it's new to him regardless, the experience of taking a life and also of following the rituals that come after taking someone's life in a way that's, like, socially acceptable in this culture. It kind of subverts a lot of our more natural sensibilities around taking life and around death.
Nice. The only thoughts that you two haven't already brought up, because I think you've had excellent points to this question about leadership, would be that Paul is presented more than just the protagonist, kind of the golden boy. Like, the first 100 pages or so are all various people in the Duke's employ, being astounded of this boy who looks like a boy and speaks like a man and has this tactical precision and, studies these old tapes and learns how the Fremen walk. And he's being set up very clearly as if someone we're supposed to root for. But, he does have these successes largely as a direct result of violence and manipulation. Despite Paul's tears, Jameis was an obstacle to Paul's leadership. Like, he could not have emerged from that encounter as a leader without killing him. And so he killed him. And the religious implanting in the Fremen, Jessica and Paul can like roll their eyes at it, but they still use it. The manipulation of the Fremen has these direct beneficial results. It leads to their inclusion in this tribe and positions of status, and they both use it. And so those methods are morally ambiguous, I guess, at best. And I think that's something Herbert is doing intentionally. He's not saying that this is good or this is bad, but making us ask these questions in the same way that you pointed out rightfully, like, how can I straightforwardly analyze this conversation between Chani and Paul? Look how it's happening. It's like in a drug-infused orgy where both of them are remembering the past of a future, and it's not straightforward. And I think that's also sort of the point.
This one side note about like I think what Priya was going back a little bit, like she was talking about like when they were crying like during the funeral. Like I thought for sure they're going to mention about wasting water at that time. I'm surprised they didn't.
Well, Chani does like sort of chastise him at the end, because this section both begins and ends with Paul crying. I don't know if everyone else noticed that, but it's crying over the dead because he's having this vision of all these people that are going to die. And Chani's sort of like, all right, well, let them at least have their life yet. Like, you're crying about people who will die, who haven't even been born yet, like that is sort of a waste of water.
I think that on the subject of water, there are things we learn about water that were entirely unexpected in this section.
Yeah, we learn a lot in this section. What do you learn in this one?
That they have like all this water and it's kind of like sacred, and they're not like allowed to touch it. And like it just made me really, I don't know, it kind of confused me. Like I know that this is just something that they are like, of course it's sacred because it takes a lot to actually accumulate all this water. But at the same time, there's this dichotomy between the fact that people are preserving every droplet of water that escapes from their body. Meanwhile, there's all this water that they've gathered that they could be using instead of like drinking their own sweat and tears and blood. And so it just made me feel that like this conservative attitude towards water is something that is more embedded in culture versus actual necessity. There was a time when there was actual necessity, right? Before they learned how to accumulate water in such quantities. But there is also like this, like if you take a real world example, like there could be you might have people who are very frugal with money, and they continue to be that way even once they have a lot of money, because old habits like die hard. And in this case, it's like this becomes so embedded in culture, old habits die hard kind of sort of thing.
Something that you just reminded me of when you were speaking, Priya, is have you seen Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon?
I can't remember now if I've seen that or not. It's like so familiar, but like I don't recall.
It's extraordinary. It's this Chinese movie. It has Michelle Yeoh in it, so I feel like a lot of people will have been rewatching after.
I know she's in it, but I can't. I feel like I've seen like if I've seen it, I probably saw it like more than 10 years
That's okay.
ago.
I can summarize it. So, it is this, action film, and it takes place in China, in like over parts of the Gobi Desert. And there's so much of this footage that's like dry, punishing, sun, heat. And then the warrior is like courting the love interest, and he runs her a bath. I'm just thinking back on that, like, oh my God, like not like a face wash, bath in the middle of the desert. And it reminded me of that when you're thinking about the Sietch and all their water. I will say though, what makes you think they don't need it? Because do you remember what Stilgar tells Jessica it's for? We get 2 clues about what it's for in this section specifically.
I would like you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I
I
don't
want you to
remember.
guess, you or Dan, like, what is this water, this like unbelievable stash of, water, and has sacred significance, and it has wealth, like monetary
Terraforming,
significance.
to terraform the
Yeah,
planet.
Yeah, that was gonna be my guess as well.
exactly. With this, we will change the face of Arrakis,
That would make sense.
which takes more water than it takes to sustain, a tribe that's thirsty. It's terraforming an entire planet is their goal. And another thing that we see it for is that we saw this quaint little, like, oh, what does drowned mean at the banquet? If you remember that, I think it was the smuggler's daughter.
Yeah, they talked about like the boat on the like when Paul was talking about the lakes on Caladan, right?
Yeah, the or the drowning fisherman. Like
Yeah.
he was trying to do an anecdote about greed, and they're like missing the point. They're like, wait a minute, fishermen drowned? Like, what do either of those words mean? But then we see Jessica make this discovery, and I don't even know if she's shared this with Paul yet. The Fremen totally know what drowning is because they only got the water of life because they drowned a sandworm. So, like, take into account what it means, because a sandworm is something we've only seen as like a wild beast of the desert. So they have the ability to capture, isolate, and then drown a sandworm. And that's something that is obviously pretty hush hush.
Yeah, and the sandworms are like akin to like they call 'em maker, right? So like they're not just like wild animals, they're drowning. Like I think there's a lot more significance to that. I don't know what the significance is, but it seems like there's a
But
lot more.
just like the sheer engineering feat that it would take to do this,
Yeah.
it's definitely not something that happens in the wild. There's no wild water of life. So you're right. It's more than a wild animal. It's a maker. I shouldn't have blasphemed Shai Hulud. My mistake.
I also get the sense that not all Fremen know about the water of life. Or am I right or am I wrong? Because I feel like
I don't know, but it sounds right.
because I feel like, well, if everybody knew about the water of life, I'm sure not everyone would feel the need to preserve and save it, while they continue to kind of like, conserve every drop and act, water is a scarcity. And if everyone knew that it's not as scarce as they think it is, then perhaps there wouldn't be such conservative mindedness about saving water amongst everyone, right? Like not everyone's goals align, or have loftier goals than their own personal needs. So
Oh, I see what you're saying.
like I feel like the waters of life would get like raided pretty fast.
But just a point of clarity, the water of life is specifically what comes out of a drowned sandworm. It's not the water that's in the sietch.
Oh, that's what. Okay, that's a good distinction to make.
Yeah, so
So
the water of life is like the bile of a sandworm of a maker that has been drowned and becomes this narcotic drug that's fatal to someone who drinks it. And then someone who drinks it, like Jessica, who's able to change it, changes that water of life and makes it into this palatable narcotic drug. But your point stands. I just want to make sure we caught that before it went too far.
okay. No, that's a really good point to make. So if I'm understanding correctly, the sandworms are drowned in the waters of the Sietch, and then from that arises the water of life.
We just know the Fremen have the technology and the incentive to be able to drown a sandworm, and imagine how much water that takes.
Okay, and the water, right.
So yeah, I do see your point that like if everyone had access to the knowledge of all this water, then maybe they wouldn't have the same goals. But I think it's said in the text, like Stilgar says, do you know that there are people who are thirsty and they wouldn't have touched this water? So I think it is known to all Fremen.
Or did he just mean amongst those who know?
Perhaps.
I guess maybe I am a cynic and don't believe in the goodness of all people.
Maybe it's goodness, but think about the last episode, the title of it, Spannensbogen, if that's the correct pronunciation, that self-imposed delay between desire for a thing and the act of reaching out to grasp that thing. When it's brought up, it says the Fremen were supreme in that quality. Not specific Fremen, but this is something that's like allowed their race to succeed, I think.
That would make sense.
And maybe there's some critique on like painting the Fremen as this monolith, but that is, I think, how we're presented them, at least in this section. Like we joked a little bit earlier about adding the characters Caliph and Orlop. And if you're like a super big Dune fan and you don't know who Caliph and Orlop are, and Jeff, let's not forget Jeff, that's fine. They're the sons of Jameis that Paul like inherits, and they're not really characters except something that shows the Fremen culture, shows how normal it is for guardianship to change hands through combat like this. Like they accept him as their guardian, maybe because they think he's the prophet, and this is like a big increase to their social status, but they're not really used as characters except to show that this is how Fremen culture is. So that's how I saw the Fremen restraint in not touching the water.
When you said Jeff, by the way, this is unrelated to the thought you just expressed when you said Jeff. I was reminded of how George R.R. Martin, he'll come up with like a million weird spellings and a million weird names, and then you'll have like one random character who's just like a really like typical name, and it's not changed at all. It'll always like catch you by surprise.
It is Calef, Kaleff, and Jeff, Geoff. So they do share a double F, and we could argue that that's like a non-standard spelling, perhaps especially in the 60s. But I'm not familiar enough with George R.R. Martin to comment further.
It just looked like Jeffrey to me with the R-E-Y cut off of it.
That's Jeff. But yeah, that's, you know, a lot comes to the surface in this section, and spice orgy or not, it's an interesting section.
Agreed. So there are many implications around loyalty in this section of the book and themes around that. I guess as far as the Fremen are concerned with loyalty, they've sort of accepted Paul into the fold, and they accept him as almost like a messiah sort of figure. And in return, I imagine they expect or have grown to almost feel entitled to Paul's loyalty in turn as well. So that's what I gathered on that theme from that. And also if we go back to the section with the slave, there's also themes of loyalty being presented there, because he seems to be acting out of a sense of loyalty to the Atreides. And even though he is a slave now. So that was also an interesting moment where that comes up.
I thought like it was interesting like how she was like pretty disappointed like when he chose her for a slave. They're like, but she's like, but I'm still young, mostly. Like,
James' wife.
Yeah. So that like just like the inner like the kind of mechanical workings. I mean, to me, like I got the sense like this kind of stuff happens all the time, you know, and there's just like procedures in place that happen, you know, like they have these ceremonies, like they pass on the wives and the children to the next person, and it's just like regular course of business for this group. But like, yeah, because they're all in the same tribe and they're all kind of working for like that's like the goal, like the number one priority is like
I get what you're saying. Like, even though she's scorned, she's not going to do anything that's going to hurt like the tribe or his future attachments, because it's like more important to be loyal.
Right, because the tribe is the most important part, right? Like that's the first priority for all of them. So like she's annoyed. Yeah, she's annoyed that she's not going to be his wife, or you know, she's not taken for his wife.
Yeah,
and only a slave. But Yeah.
We see that even like outside of the cavern, like a couple chapters ago. I believe it was Liet when the Duke is throwing his goblet on the floor. Liet has no shame at all. He like pours all that water inside his own suit. Like he's like, my
Right.
loyalty to the Fremen is so much more important than like my loyalty to the Duke, you know, or my loyalty to the Emperor. He's employed by the Emperor and he's in the court of the Duke, and that Fremen loyalty is the one that he chooses. And I'm sure it is complex and a political choice.
Was that loyalty though, or just more like hoarding, like we were talking about before? I think Priya's analogy of like, rich people like still being cheap is a good one. I mean, we understand like, I think yeah, there's like a greater purpose there, but like, yeah, the Kynes' thing before is more, to me, it seemed more hoarding than loyalty.
Um, perhaps,
Yeah,
perhaps it is a real need though. Liet dies because he doesn't have enough water, uh,
yeah,
and he does choose his tribe many other times. But I think it's interesting the way that this work chooses to explore loyalty instead of just like dogged obedience. Because I feel like we'll see in some movies these like villains and protagonists who are up against each other, and they'll have only the thinnest explanation as why. It's like, well, I'm fighting for the Huns. I'm like, okay, but why? Like, who cares really? And I think the way that you talk about the Fremen and Paul having this cautious but intimate loyalty to each other is much more interesting. It's not just, you know, dogged obedience that's moved on from, but it's influenced by like, well, he knew how to wear his still suit and he participated in our ritual. And even though he had to be advised, he still did the right thing. And we obviously see this sort of weird, shaky relationship between the Duke and the Emperor, in which they were friends, but he was troublesome to the Emperor because of how powerful he was. And the Baron himself, having to stay on the right side of the Emperor, but still doing this dirty work for him. More of the political side that you have been claiming to be enjoying, Dan.
yeah, yeah. I'm interested to see like, I mean, I hope we get some more perspective from the actual emperor, besides just like the front matter quotes that we have on some of them.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know like how, like what his thought process is here. Like, is he just playing the two sides against each other to, like strip them down at both of them?
Way more than two. It's a bunch of houses that the Emperor has
Yeah, but at least the two that we, the Harkonnens and the Atreides, right? Like those, like, and like that seems to be like Arrakis is like the most important part because of the most important world, right? Because of the spice, and so he's like kind of playing against each other. And they talk over and over again about how the Baron Harkonnens like finances are all like depleted because of it. And so like, is that the Emperor's plan all along, is to deplete?
Maybe.
Yeah,
See, wheels within wheels.
yeah. I mean,
Maybe no one house should get too powerful. But I also think about like the Bene Gesserits, because we haven't really talked about them as much this section, but they have a series of pretty significant moves that sort of take like two lines and they aren't really lingered on, but they're really powerful. We've seen suggestions before that like Jessica is loathed by a lot of people as being a Bene Gesserit witch, seeing that like, oh, she has her allegiance to someone else, to the sisterhood. But when we're first introduced to her, she bore a boy, like against the wishes. She chose her Duke. So she betrayed or like chose a different loyalty. But we see the Bene Gesserits angling again with the Fenrings. Did either of you guys catch up on that, pick up on that during your first read, like their plan?
I didn't.
Well, hold on. I'm going to say one thing first, though. Going back to
Okay, yeah,
the the loyalty thing, because Dan brought up how it's so strange and business as usual for Jameis's wife to kind of transfer now to Paul to do with as he sees fit, and how his children also become now Paul's responsibility. Like the last comment that I have to make on loyalty in that regard is that loyalty within this culture seems to be that you are loyal to the greater cause or the greater good or to your tribe, versus to any individual person. Like the wife can easily just like, she transfers from her husband, to whom you would assume she would have been loyal during during his lifetime to Paul now, and she has no qualms around it. The children go to Paul, and they have no qualms around it. And we find out that this transfer has happened before, and now their loyalties lie with Paul. But in a sense, they don't lie with Paul, because if someone were to kill Paul, then she would go on to the person who killed Paul. So it seems that overall, at the end of the day, the loyalty lies with the tribe. And I think that that's what I glean from that kind of weird transference of like his wife and kids are yours now. So yeah. And going back to Lady Fenring now and their plan. I think her plan is to seduce Feyd-Rautha
Yeah, that's
so
right.
that she can become pregnant with his child. And now, at the end of that chapter with that exchange, we find out that she's a Bene Gesserit, and they have this plan for that bloodline to continue. But I didn't quite understand why they want that bloodline to continue.
Sure, sure. So we do know that she's a Bene Gesserit because she left Jessica this note in their encoded Bene Gesserit language. But we definitely see that a lot more prominently because she travels here with her husband, with Count Fenring, and she's being hit on by this teenager. It's his 17th birthday, and sort of disgusted by him saying like, no, you can't honor me, absolutely not. And then they realize that it's tactically necessary. They see how popular and how beloved he is, and we know that Paul has already found out that Jessica is like the daughter of the Baron. So the Baron's bloodline is obviously one that the Bene Gesserits really want, and they believe Paul dead. So next best. I mean, Bene Gesserit's got to have a plan B. So they see Feyd-Rautha and they're like, well, we'll just make that connection between a Bene Gesserit and that Harkonnen line. And so she makes her plan, and there's again that question of loyalty because her own husband is, he's like, well, I do have something to get over, but that's the plan, that's just what's necessary. The breeding program is something that they've both chosen. Again, this deeply personal concept that's shaped by a lot of these different factors.
Until you mentioned it just now, I had completely I guess it's because of the space of time between our recordings, perhaps, but I had completely forgotten that Jessica is the Baron's daughter. So that's a good refresher. It was only a big, big reveal, and then I forgot it. But
Yeah.
that would make sense why that
they need
bloodline
that
is
bloodline.
important.
Precisely. So that's why they need Feyd-Rautha.
Got it. Okay, that all makes a lot more sense now. I wanna take a moment to discuss something very ominous and unexpected and just very straightforward that Paul says. Like, it's kind of like harrowing, where he declares that his mother is his enemy, and she does not know it, but just by bearing him and raising him to be what he is, she is his enemy. And interestingly, I think he has these thoughts shortly, if I remember correctly, shortly after she's having thoughts about warning Paul about Fremen women, because she notices some, like, I guess, some chemistry between Cheney
Why
and
is he
Paul.
singing a love song to that girl?
Right. Like, it's just she seems like she's being like overprotective mom in that moment. Like, she doesn't want anyone seducing her child. And then Paul at the end of that chapter goes, my mother is my enemy, almost as if he had like read her thoughts and like declares she is my enemy. But it seems, actually, given what he's expressing, that it's completely unrelated to that, and has more to do with these visions that he has of the what he keeps calling the jihad, and what is to happen in his name. And uh it's kind of, I didn't entirely know what to make of it, because is he saying she is my enemy, like, in a manner of speaking, like, because she is responsible for making me into what I am to become? Or is he like setting her up as an enemy that he is going to now actively have to like either separate himself from or work against. That's what I didn't know what to make of.
I have no answer, only theory, which could be wrong.
Go for it. I don't read this one more than I have.
So the Reverend Mother, the Gaia Helena Mohayim, in the beginning does accuse Jessica of like being, I guess, greedy or like seeking self-aggrandizing and seeking to like, she's like, you thought you could bear the Kwisatz Haderach. Like it wasn't your job to have a boy, it's your job to have a girl, but you thought you could make the Messiah. So that's what I believe is setting up Jessica as someone who wants to make the Messiah, wants to make this Kwisatz Haderach. Maybe she's having second thoughts about that, but that was, an ambition of hers. And Paul sees his potential to become that and seems absolutely terrified by it. Like you see, he doesn't want to drink this water of life. Cheney is twice seen like smashing that bag down. So he drinks a lot of it. So Jessica drinks a lot and pushing him into this destiny that he's like afraid of. So I saw them as being on opposite sides, that she'll like push him into that and he doesn't desire it. But it's a funny passage and it definitely caught my attention when I read it too.
Like it made me think, like, is it foreshadowing a rift that will come between Paul and Jessica in the future? Like up until now, you saw him as kind of deferring to her ultimately. Even though like he has his own intuitions about him and ultimately he knows what to do in situations where she doesn't quite know what to do. We saw him get the two of them further, it's implied, than she would have gotten on her own. But at the same time, now it makes me wonder if they're going to have a rift between them. Whatever, or it's speculation what manner in which that rift kind of takes hold. But this is kind of the first time you really hear Paul expressing something so severe against his mother.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the future because as I keep trying to tell Dan, I don't think he believes me. I don't think Dune is a spoilable book, at least not any more than reading it will spoil it. Like in the very beginning of this chapter, this gladiator chapter, it begins on his 17th birthday. Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen killed his 100th slave gladiator in the family games. And, that's exactly what happens. And the way in which it happens is very interesting. But as we're in the ring and they're grappling and Feyd-Rautha is like putting these darts into his slave's arm and then being shocked that like the slave is using the like metal in his arm as an extra shield to like, bitch slap Feyd-Rautha around a little bit. There's never this fear that like, oh, maybe there'll be a dramatic upset and Feyd-Rautha will die. Like we know from the very beginning, it tells us he killed the slave gladiator. Like that is the outcome. And, the way that that future happens is interesting. So I think the things that they tell us are really just the things that do happen. So I don't say that there's something that you can't see or can't predict in the future. So trust your instincts. That's all I can say.
There's no big twists that we need to look out for.
Well, there are twists, but you guys forget them.
Yeah, that's true.
Lady Jessica's a Harkonnen twist.
I mean, I was like, oh right. I mean, the moment you mentioned it, I was like, oh right, like what I read 2 months ago
was actually the truth. Yeah, exactly.
But also I think that to some degree the excerpts at the start of chapters, like the little bits from the Princess Irulan book and writings and stuff, do predict or tell us what is to happen. Like we know from the very beginning that the Duke is going to die several chapters before it happens. Perhaps like even from the beginning of the book, we know that he's going to die through betrayal. These are things that we know. But I think now in the book, I get the sense that we're sort of in a bit of an uncharted terrain, because now we are getting excerpts that tell us little bits and pieces about Muad'Dib, but we don't really know what exactly is to happen in Paul's fate. Like Cheney can say, hey, I have a vision where I see that I have your child. But in my mind, there is still the question of, is her vision reliable? I know that Paul also has had visions of Chani, and he finds her to be the girl that he's seen in his visions. But I guess maybe this is a part of me that wants there to be a bit of suspense about the outcome of things. Like maybe I want to believe that something will happen that prevents this vision from coming true. I don't know. But like it's a little bit exciting to think like, will this vision come true or not? I don't know.
Yeah, but it does tell you some very basic things. Like if there's some quote from Muad'Dib that has not been spoken yet, you can pretty much tell like Paul's not going to die in the next chapter.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. Whether or not all these things will come to pass remains to be seen.
Yes, that's what I meant.
But he doesn't just see one future, right? Doesn't see like a bunch of potential futures.
Exactly. He's
Yeah.
like singing when he's singing to Cheney, he's like, oh, this is like a song from Gurney. And in like half of my futures, Gurney is alive and I get to see him again, but not
Yeah.
all of them. So we don't really know which future is going to happen.
So basically, Paul is like Doctor Strange, and he's envisioned every possibility or many different possibilities. And um, I do like, it goes back to like this gripe that I had with the premise of Foundation, which is that like the whole premise of Foundation was that like psychohistory predicts the future and predicts outcomes, but like my brain just wants to like resist that, you know? I guess I have like this thing where like I want prophecies to not come true, to teach to stick to that lesson, that like that we learn in fantasy like as a genre, that like prophecies are either self-fulfilling or they don't come true, or they only come true because the person believed in it in the first place and put in motion these events.
Closed loop time travel makes another win.
I'm gonna put a spoiler here for people who haven't read Foundation. So I'll put a note here about what Priya just said.
Okay.
Anyway, the psychohistory does predict the future, but it's only because the second Foundation is making that future happen, right? So it's not like it's written, but it's also like enforced by the second Foundation. So it's like it's not exactly like predict. It's not prophecy. It's not prophecy, right? It's like people manipulating the future the way that they need it to be to get to the
It's manipulation. That's totally how
yeah
I see the Bene Gesserit in this series, that they are supreme meddlers and they drag history and the present into the future that they choose.
yeah. Wasn't there a discussion? I don't know if I think we discussed it earlier. Like all these rituals and whatever by the Fremen were kind of planted there by
Yeah, they were all
potentially by
planted by the Bene Gesserit, and I'm not saying
yeah
that they're identical to the Second Foundation. I think that's too simplistic a comparison.
yeah
But yeah, like all of this is only possible because a long time ago, the Bene Gesserit seeded this through. And we also see some, background on how old the Fremen are when Jessica communes with the Reverend Mother. If we see the Zen Sunni, and I think this has been confirmed in the lore that that's like the Zen Buddhists and the Sunni Muslims, and has that history, but obviously changed over like millions of years and space travel and the
yeah
hostility of the environment of Arrakis, which has imprinted in their religion a great deal. But it is like 10 million years, and it seems like the Bene Gesserit have been active for at least as long as that.
yeah. I wonder what ideas they actually planted versus like what kind of evolved from their original seed, right?
The
Like I
point
don't yeah
is that like how can you tell the difference between human prediction and prescience and like god level power just by influencing something over the course of 10 million years? Like if I had 10 million years to carry out a plan, of course that would be like on the level of a god.
yeah.
So even if it was just carried out from human actions lifetime after lifetime. Speaking of the lore, actually, And you can cut this if this is too ridiculous, but my gosh, the lore about Dune is so deep. When Jameis died, there's this, ritual, and they intone Shai Hulud, who has ordained the phases for the moons that daily wane, and in the end appear as bent and withered twigs. And I just had like a moment's curiosity, just a moment, about the moons on Arrakis, because living on Earth, this is where this podcast is recorded, the prominent effect of our moon's gravity is on our tidal ocean. So without oceans, what's like the impact and the significance of moons on Arrakis? And little did I know, I looked up the moons of Arrakis. People have like meticulously detailed the history, the impact, the meaning. Like I'm looking this up and finding the nitrogen composition of an Arakan moon. So anything that you think to look up has so much history behind it.
Is that from just an extrapolation from this book, or is that like from like future books maybe like that
Probably
may or may not be canon?
Yeah. Probably from future books which are canon and future books which are not canon. Probably
Yeah.
all cobbled together.
I think I got in the sections with the Reverend Mother Ramallo, I got a lot of that feeling of the history of the Fremen and the the ancient, it's like we've seen a Reverend Mother before, but this Reverend Mother seems more connected to almost like an ancient wisdom and an ancient way of the Bene Gesserit that we haven't seen up to this point. And I found descriptions of her very fascinating. Just constant like emphasis on how old she is, which were a little bit humorous in moments. I thought like she looked like a collection of sticks draped in the black robe, and there's a lot of descriptions there that make her seem like she is like on the way out. And it just makes you wonder like how long has she been around? Has she lived like a normal human lifespan? And then I also found the powers that she has to be way beyond what we've seen with the test of the Gom Jabbar. Am I saying that right? The test that Paul is put through. And like this test that Jessica is put through seems even more like life and death. And these parts I enjoyed, the fact that the Reverend Mother is so old and then she appears to Jessica as a young girl, was also fascinating. So yeah, there's a lot of like mysticism there, amongst the Fremen in relation to the Bene Gesserit that becomes revealed in these scenes, which fascinated me.
And it should make us wonder if that's awaiting Jessica now that she has inherited that. Is she going to have unusual powers? Is she going to have this unusual lifespan? We're not sure.
Yeah, definitely strange. It's like she was uploading her consciousness into Jessica.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, it felt very, I mean, I wasn't expecting a scene like that, and it kind of came out of nowhere. And
Jessica too, I think.
right, exactly. Like for all her like Bene Gesserit training, she was not prepared for this and had to kind of, figure it out as it was happening to her. And she also mentioned it was happening to her way faster, at a pace that her training had not quite prepared her for.
Yeah.
I thought I mean, the interesting part to me about that was that not only like was the what was her name? Ramallah. I said it earlier. Ramallo's memories were uploaded, but like she had also inherited the memories, like, and it's like had gone like all the way, like through the history of the Fremen, right? So Jessica's not only getting her memories, but like the entire memory of like the Fremen civilization. So like that's really going to expand her mind in the same way that Paul's mind was expanded when he was able to see like the all the timelines at once.
Exactly. It's not just another human's life. It's like so much of a civilization's experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, uploading consciousness is fun in science fiction, and the moons may or not be canon. One thing that is canon is the Fremen's uncanny ability to measure water. And if you see, like, when they're counting out the water that Jameis will is worth, it goes down to like the 32nd of like a drachm. It's tiny, tiny little segments, and you can see that superb accuracy in their water measurement. And Jessica is even noting that the walls of the meter, how they're measuring, held no trace of moisture. The water flows off those walls without binding tension. She saw a profound clue to Fremen technology in the simple fact. They were perfectionists. So that is canon. That should terrify the Baron, who thinks that they're, only worthwhile as prisoners. And in the same way that I thought the Trisolaran droplet should have terrified the Earth. Like the fact that they can just do that they can waste no water at all. What else could they do if they had their perfectionist, aims on weapons development or something? It should terrify them.
Yeah, they're way more advanced than like I give them credit. Like, when the book started, I'd assume they were just sort of like a tribal kind of, like people, that were just there taken over because they were outmatched, technologically and by these other people who just came and invaded them, right? So, but that's clearly not the case.
Definitely.
Another thing that kind of speaks to that is what I found unexpected in Paul's conversation with I've forgotten her name at the moment. Jameis's wife, is it Hera?
Mm-hmm.
She Paul asks her a question and she has a scientific answer to the question that you would not expect her to have, not because she's a woman, but because she is also simultaneously partaking in this very not very female friendly ritual of just becoming, just giving herself up as Paul's servant because she was married to the man that Paul killed. Like that's not very advanced thinking as you would expect it, but or like forward thinking, or like liberated thinking. But at the same time, she seems to have this intimate knowledge as well of the science behind things. So these two seemed kind of unexpected to me, these two realities of her. And yeah, it makes you think that every Fremen is very, very much in tune with the scientific nature of their existence.
Yeah, Dune is not science fiction, it's ecological drama.
Boom. I did have one final thought that this section left me with, which is what impact does this have, this ritual that Jessica went through, have on her unborn child? Because the Reverend Mother seems to recognize as the ritual is underway that Jessica is pregnant, but had not mentioned it. And now that I guess she is sort of within her, she recognizes it. But at the same time, she said she recognizes the gender of the child and says that a male child could not have survived this. So we do get the sense from that this baby is going to be affected in some way by what Jessica has undergone. And Jessica herself says, "I did it, my poor unformed dear little daughter. I brought you into this universe and exposed your awareness to all its varieties without any defenses." So it gives you the sense that like she's this baby, very vulnerable, has taken a full hit of something that she should not have encountered, and that is very interesting to see what impact that will have on the child once she is born.
Yeah, I'd imagine like she would be born with like the ability, like like the same thing that we're talking about with Jessica, like be able to like inherit all those memories of the entire tribe. And so she'll have like all this knowledge, but like no training to like sort it out, right? Because like it seems like the Bene Gesserit, even like Paul is like, going to have this very rigorous training to be able to kind of harness all that knowledge and all these powers. And then this baby's gonna be born with all these powers, but like no way to kind of harness them.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, will these things be to her advantage, or could they be made to be to her advantage, or will they be detrimental to her?
Well, I suppose we will find out in future chapters, or maybe we'll see, or maybe future books. For now, thanks for listening. Please check out rehydrate.space for release episodes and reading lists. Leave comments by emailing us at rehydrate@fastmail.com or on Twitter @rehydratepod. And please join us next episode for season 7, episode 8, covering book 3, The Prophet, chapters 1 to 6 of Dune by Frank Herbert.